joining me today. I want to show you how to make a really easy gum paste rose. I know there's a lot of different schools of thought on this. You know, some people are like so into their gum paste flowers, and I totally get that. You really can hardly tell the difference between the gum paste rose and a real rose. They're just so real. But really what I want to show you is those of you that are not so comfortable with gum paste roses, are just wanting to kind of get your feet wet a little bit, you can still make a really pretty gum paste rose, and I want to give you a couple of tricks on that just to get you started, and then you can build up your skills from there. Okay, now you might be familiar with centers for roses, and what they look like is basically a teardrop that's a round bud. Now, they're not an edible product, it's like a plastic product, and they're not expensive, but you know, if you can have something that's like cheap, like fondant or gum paste to make your center out of, then I say do that. You know, we're all, you know, kind of on a budget as cake decorators, especially when we're getting started. So all I'm going to do here is start with a little ball of gum paste that matches the color that I'm working with. And I'm just going to kind of roll it into a teardrop shape with a nice sharp tip. And what I want to make sure to do is whatever size my round cutter is that I'm going to be using, I want to make my center that size. So you can see that this one's short, that I want to elongate it a little bit. Now, another option, an easy rose to do, is this 5-petal cutter. So you'll see that roughly that's the right size for that one. There's some pros and cons to using this. I personally prefer this because I think you can get a little bit more of a realistic look, but I'm going to show you both of those. But first what I want to do is show you the rose center itself. So I basically have just a regular green floral wire here. This is longer than I need to work with, so it's really easy to cut with scissors. So I'm just going to cut it into 3, and then I can pull these together later. So what I want to do is, the tip of it is obviously straight. What I want to do is use my needle nose pliers, and all I'm going to do is give this a little turn, and it's not tight enough for me, so I'm going to squeeze it shut a little bit. And what it's going to do is really grab into the center of the bud and give it something to hang on to. So this is what we end up with. It's like a little bit of a shepherd's hook. So here's my really fun trick. Most of the time what people will do is moisten this with water and stick it into their teardrop. What I prefer to do is have it set instantly. So here's what I'm going to do. Over here I have a flame going. You can use a candle. I've just got a blowtorch because we use them in classes a lot. I'm going to heat up the end of my wire until it starts to change color, and that's going to take maybe 5 to 10 seconds. And then I'm going to stick it into the end of my teardrop, and it's going to burn the sugar and set instantly. Be really careful with this. You don't want to see it starting to change color. It's white. You can just put it right into the end of the bud. It's going to burn that sugar and then cool off instantly. Now what this does for you, because it's got that hook on there and because it's hot, that sugar melts and then it cools right back down, and it's on here and it's not coming off. It's a really big problem for a lot of people if they're just sticking the wire in there, or they're using water or piping gel or something to help it hang on to it. It doesn't have time to dry if you need to use it immediately. You've got to wait overnight. So with this, you can use it immediately. So what I'm going to do is put the buds, I like to use this, it's the locker rack. You can put lots of flowers on here. It's really great for a cake decorator because you can fold it down. Pick these up at your dollar store or, you know, some kind of discount store. You can find locker racks pretty much anywhere. But all I do is turn this hook down a little bit, and then you can just hang these on here to dry, and you've got tons of room to make plenty of flowers. Okay, so I went ahead and rolled out a little bit of gum paste here. I want to make sure it's sliding around nicely on my surface. I'm going to show you how to use this 5-petal cutter first. This is an easy way to do a rose. If I'm wanting to go for a more realistic rose, I'm not going to really use this. But it's a really great starter tool, and it does help them go a little bit more quickly. Now you see as I cut it out, it just kind of looks a little bit plain. One thing I want to make sure to do is put it on this flower forming foam, and you'll see as I go around this that it ends up being a little bit floppy, but you can still work with it, and I'll show you how to put it on the rose bud that we just made in just a second. So what I have is my ball tool, and what I'm going to basically do is just basically draw a line. So my ball is going to be half on and half off the edge of this. And you're just going to apply good firm pressure, and what that does is 2 things. It thins the edge so that it looks a little more realistic, and it also kind of ruffles it a little bit so it looks not so flat. So I'm just going to go around and do that to all 5 petals. Again, it's going to get a little bit floppy, don't worry about that. Just do all 5 petals. Good firm pressure. Last one. All right, now I'm going to grab a bud. And what I like to do is, if I've just made these buds, you can just use a water pen. So I always like to prime mine a little bit. And I'm just going to brush my bud And I want to make sure to straighten my hook back out where it was hanging so that it doesn't puncture the 5-petal more than I want it to. So I'm just going to put this in the center of my hand, and I'm going to slide the wire right through the center. Try not to make that hole bigger than it needs to be. All right, so my bud is nice and moist. What I want to do is basically start with the first petal, and then I'm going to do the 3rd and the 5th petal. Okay, so this being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to do this one and then the opposite 2. So first one curls around nice and tightly. Okay, you can see now where that ruffle is coming into play. And then a little bit more water around the edge. Next petal. And again, a little bit more water on this one. And you want to meet those last 2. And try to keep that height in the center nice and even. If you have them where they're starting to come down, the rows like tall, shorter, 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 you're going to end up with something that looks more like a pine cone. Now, while we have this here, we can kind of start forming. This looks a little bit stiff and not so much like a real rose. So what you want to do is kind of start pulling these edges back a little bit. You can roll them, you can pinch them, tighten them up, just kind of give it a little bit of personality so it doesn't look so stiff and perfect. So then we're going to go to our last 2 petals, wrap it around, and then our very last petal on the 5th. Again, a little bit more water to adhere. And then we're going to give shape to these last 2 petals. So what I want to do at this point is hang it upside down to dry after I've gone my first round with my 5-petal cutter. The reason I want to hang it upside down is if I have it upright and I stick it in styrofoam, that can open up a little more than I want it to. This way I can kind of control it and keep it closed, especially towards the center. So you're just going to hook that wire over and hang it upside down again. Now, one thing I do like about this is you're doing basically 5 petals at a time. But let me point out what I don't like. To me, it just doesn't, it looks a little bit stiff and cartoonish. It doesn't look quite as realistic as I want it to be. And here, this is 2 rounds of 5-petal flowers. Even if I kept doing another one, to me, it just ends up looking a little bit imbalanced. Like, I'm really tempted to add like 2 more petals on the outside of this just to even it up. And you can certainly do that. Add extra petals to the outside as you go. And then you can also do buds if you just want to do 1 round. Let me show you, though, how much more realistic it looks with just a round cutter. So I've rolled out a little bit more gum paste. Again, this is very thin as you can get it, but still handle it without it tearing. I went ahead and did a little bit of a bigger rosebud, and I'm using the smaller cutter. This doesn't quite match up, but let me show you why I want to start with that. So let me just cut a circle first, the smaller one. I can actually probably go ahead and cut 2 or 3 of these without it drying out and get them on here. So I'm going to start with my bud and a little bit of water right around the edge of the bud. Okay, now I'm not going to go all the way down to the base. What I want to do is keep the height of the circle the same height as the bud. So I'm just going to wrap one side around and then wrap the other side around. And this is the point where you can use your hands or a small tool to kind of pull that out a little bit. Now you're going to go on with your second petal. So just wrapping that around and pulling the tip out again. And you'll notice that I keep the top level with the center. And then also it's not going down to the base. I'm not trying to build up the bulk here. I'm really just trying to get a nice wrap of petals here at the top. And then I can start building my bulk out with petals. So just going on with our third one. A little bit of water. And you can see also, I'm not going opposite, like one on this side and one on the opposite side. I'm pulling it over a little bit, so it's almost in thirds now. And what that does is gives a little bit of the appearance that it's kind of wrapping petal to petal to petal. So again, just kind of wrapping it around and then pulling that edge out. And here, I can go ahead and hang it back upside down and then cut out some more petals. And I have another one here that I did go ahead and put a few more petals on. This is the point that I'm actually going to switch from my smaller cutter to the bigger cutter. And I'm going to go ahead and cut out a bigger circle here. And what this does is it gives me the opportunity to kind of start building that bulk and make it look like a nice full rose instead of like that itty bitty small one. Okay, so going with the next size circle, and I want to continue to ruffle these as well, especially as I get to the outer petals. It's a lot more important. That way you get that nice thin outer edge and then that realistic ruffle to it as well. And don't worry, like here I have a little bit of a tear, if you can see this here. This kind of adds to the realism too, because if you look at a real rose out in nature, it's not going to have perfection. You know, there's little insects and things out there that nibble at them. Things happen in nature, so don't beat yourself up if you have a tiny little flaw like that and it looks a little bit realistic. Okay, so here again, I've put water on here, and I'm going to just kind of start wrapping from the next petal, and I also want to make sure that this is lined up, center, height, and don't worry if you have excess coming down here, you can cut this off. And then you're also, if you're going for realism too, you're going to put a calyx there. That's the green part of the flower that's going to give it a little bit more realism to itself. So here what I'm going to do is just kind of bind this, and then you can tear off or wrap what's excess. And just make sure that's nice and clean and formed too. So you just keep adding petals, and then as the extra ones go out, you'll want to give them a little bit more space in between each layer, and that way you have a nice full flower. You can make them as big as you need to. So we'll just continue to let that dry. Again, a good tip is to let these, let's say you're making like 10 or 12 at a time, go ahead and do like one on each flower and then go back and start at the first one again, and that's going to help that stay in its shape until you can get that second petal on there and really form it the way you want to. Another option, people kind of like to do realism. This has been sitting here just a few minutes. You can see it's still a little bit pliable. But I have this mold here, and it's basically just a petal. And this might be something that you would be using for, let's say you have petals kind of cascading down the cake, or you've wrapped the base layer in petals. This gives it a little bit of an impression that it looks a lot more realistic too. So some people go to the trouble of impressing each of their petals to put onto their rose before they put it on there as well. You know, if you're just starting out and you just want to kind of get a feel for how the petals wrap around there and just kind of get your feet wet, start with this and then kind of work your way up to the details of it. And I think you're really going to love making gum paste flowers. So that's my easy gum paste rose. Give it a try. I think you're going to love it. Have fun with it. Thanks for watching.